workshop. So Ritapriya and Debashrita both are PhD students
Okay,
working with me here in the university.
great. Nice to meet you, albeit virtually, but
Nice to meet you too. We were in communication when your session was in the virtual mode during the
yes,
panel
yes,
workshop. So
yes. Thank you very much for helping me with that. Yeah,
nice to meet you, Bunny.
you too.
Okay, we already started now the transmission on YouTube. It's working, but I think we will just wait some minutes.
Yeah, I think we're a couple of minutes before time, so maybe we just,
Yes.
yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so the transmission is working. So I think we can start like in a few minutes, whenever you're ready. Like official starting is in 1 minute. So from my side, you can go for it. And thank you and have fun.
Okay, maybe we should start. Yes? Okay. All right. So a very warm welcome to everyone joining us today for the second day of our International Forum on Unthinking the Crisis. My name is Bani Gill, and I'm a junior professor at the Institute of Sociology at the University of Tübingen. And I am very pleased to be chairing this very interesting panel today that has been put together by colleagues at the University of Hyderabad in India. And I really must thank all the presenters for joining us, as it is about 8 p.m. in India. So thank you very much for making it at this kind of awkward hour. The panel today is titled The Everyday Crisis of Citizenship in Contemporary India. And just a couple of words about the format. So first, I will invite the presenters to speak for about 15 minutes. And then at the end, we will have a question and answer round. So, the audience is invited to either write in their questions or to raise their virtual hand, and then they can be invited to ask their question. Okay, so our first speaker for the day is Dr. Salapunathil, who will present a paper titled National Borders Among Families, Removal and Bare Life in India. Dr. Salapunathil is a sociologist and assistant professor at the Center for Regional Studies, University of Hyderabad in India. He completed his postdoc fellowship at the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Religious and Ethnic Diversity in Göttingen. He has taught sociology at Tezpur University in Assam and the Delhi School of Economics, which is at the University of Delhi. His research interests include ethnic violence, migration and borderlands, citizenship, Muslims in South Asia, and the intersection of archives and ethnography. His book, Interrogating Communalism, Violence, Citizenship, and Minorities in South India, is published by Routledge in 2019, and he has published extensively in journals such as Citizenship Studies, History and Anthropology, South Asia Research, and Contributions to Indian Sociology. Salah's current research focuses on the migration from present-day Bangladesh region to Northeast India and the crisis of citizenship and ethnic violence in contemporary times. Salah, the floor is all yours, and when you have 5 minutes, I will hold up a piece of paper that says 5 minutes, and yeah, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vani. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers and also specifically Vani for giving all of us this opportunity to be part of this wonderful event, which has series of talks and panels and discussions. So it's a pleasure to be part of such a wonderful platform and giving us an opportunity to be part of the event representing our university from India. And also, I was attending yesterday's inaugural session and subsequent session and found that, representation from various universities across the globe discussing some of the important concerns of contemporary time. So the theme of our panel is the everyday crisis of citizenship in contemporary India. And we are basically dealing with a sort of, now widely discussed issue of the national list of citizenship in Assam and the CAA, Citizenship Amendment Act, which had wider repercussions in the life of the people, especially Northeast India. So I'll be giving a brief general picture about the context, and then probably two of the other friends would be presenting in detail about their respective research work, which is connected to what I'm speaking. So to give a general picture to the audience who are not aware of it or not really know about the details of it, in 2019, Assam government published a report called National Register of Citizenship, which excluded, which is basically a survey of the citizenship in the state, and published a report which excluded almost 1.9 million people from the citizenship list. So 1.9 million people are excluded from the citizenship, and when there is illegal migrants in Assam. So in the same year, within a few months, the central government of central government passed an amendment called Citizenship Amendment Act, which guarantees citizenship to refugees from neighboring countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Afghanistan to certain religious minorities such as Hindu, Sikhs, Jains, and so on, but not for Muslims. So together, these two issues have sparked a lot of controversy in the country since these were implemented. Because one is that NRC excluded a huge number of population who were living in Assam as normal individuals, were stripped of their citizenship rights, and then there is also a looming threat of Muslim community, those who are left out from the NRC, to be removed from their social world and detained. So, so there is this huge humanitarian crisis that has emerged in India, which is unparalleled in the country since India's independence, and the issue is very much alive there in the country now. There's a lot of discussion going on. So, so I have I'm making a few preliminary observations about this context, and to think about how do we understand this crisis in contemporary India. So, first of all, it is interesting to note that when the CAA, Citizenship Amendment Act, was passed, which clearly excludes Muslim minorities in India to be considered for citizenship and provides citizenship to other religious communities, the language that state has used is, in a sense, humanitarianism, in the sense that it grants rights to people who who come from other countries who deserve to be considered as citizens. So there is a language because state clearly says that the act was put forward basically to protect the people who were persecuted as religious minorities in their respective country. So this is basically to protect the people, and so there is this language of humanitarianism, which we can see in the vocabulary of the state. But the paradox lies in the fact that although state uses the language of humanitarianism, it clearly excludes a certain section of population and see them as not worthy of considering as citizens or not worthy of living in the nation state. So this reminds of the paradox of humanitarianism that we can see in even other contexts, like even in European context, where certain policies that come up in the language of humanitarianism do include certain groups, but then also clearly exclude certain groups. So considering certain population is worthy of living in the nation, having political rights, and then excluding certain population by way of considering them as not worthy of living. So that's the first point I wanted to flag, like the kind of paradox of humanitarian politics of the state, and what is the vocabulary of the state even when there is a huge crisis taking place. Second is the religious question of CA and NRC. While NRC list was published, both large number of Bengali-speaking Hindu and Muslim population is included in the excluded from the list and rendered as illegal. Citizenship Amendment Act, which protect which promise or guarantee citizenship to Hindus who are excluded from NRC, in a sense, clearly divide line between Hindus and Muslims. So this is again something which is unparalleled in the history of the citizenship policies in India, where explicitly minority religious community is told that your interest won't be protected. So, but then it is also important to note that there is a longer history to this religious prejudice in the citizenship policies of the country since partition, because if you look at the earlier works of partition and subsequent citizenship issues, you would see that when after the partition, when those who were in Pakistan wanted to come back to India, there was clearly this distinction between refugees and migrants, and Hindus were considered as refugees and Muslims were considered as migrants. So this binary of refugees and migrants clearly tell about how one set of population is seen as worthy of considering citizenship, and one is seen as not citizens of the nation. However, another important aspect which distinguish this Citizenship Amendment Act and NRC is that although there were policies in the past as well which control and regulate the identified so-called migrant population, what we can see is the massive character of the exclusion, like 1.9 million people, and also the heightened systematic bureaucratic procedure involved in it in identifying and detecting the population of illegal migrants. However, while there was a clear bureaucratic, bureaucratic intervention over a period of time to detect illegal migrants, this was not without loopholes and ambiguities and ambivalences. Because, after the exclusion of this large number of population, there were a lot of concerns raised by the people who are excluded from the list, raising the question that whether they're actually, illegal migrants or not, because many of them claim that they have come to India before 1971, or even their parents have come during the colonial period and settled in this part of the country. But their exclusion was primarily due to the technical errors in the way in which bureaucracy, the state agencies conducted the registration of the population. So to give a brief picture about it, the process of identifying the citizen or illegal immigrant depends upon the family tree. That you have to prove that you have come to India before 1971, which is like the cutoff year, the year of Bangladesh formation. Or if you are born after 1971, you have to prove that your parents have lived in India before 1971. So there are certain paper records that you have to clearly shows the linkage with your forefathers, your early generation. So this is interesting to note that how family has become, a fundamental unit of proving the citizenship. And it is found empirically, evidentially found that many people who possess the documents do not have the right documents, or there are mistakes and errors in their document that they possess, and there are incongruencies in their records. So this point to the fact that it's not the absence of records, or they came to India after 1971 illegally. It's not because of that. It's because of their absence of proper records in hand, or the incongruencies in the records that hold render them as illegal. So there are several. I'm not going to the examples of it. Like from my own fieldwork, it is proven that many people have records, but these are not proper. Like sometimes there is disparity in terms of the ages in different records. Sometimes there are spelling errors, and there are also other kinds of factors, like say women who marry after marriage, they change their surname. This leads to certain kind of confusion. Likewise, women who marry before 18, like illegal marriage, lead to certain kind of manipulation of the age and so on. So all of these, yes, Bani, yeah, I will finish in France. All of these, lead to the kind of mistake in the way in which state identify the illegal migrant. And there is clearly a gendered dimension to it, like how women have been excluded more because of certain kind of social practices. The other important fact is that the gravity of the crisis, the intensity of the crisis is so deep, and this can only be understood because all of them are excluded from the the list, and now they are facing kind of detention, like they may be potentially detained in detention centers in Assam. But then if you have to get a clue about what would be their experience in the detention center, it's important to see the past experience of detained life in detention center. Like in one of my field work, I have conducted interviews with people who were detained earlier, even before NRC, and found out that those who lose their political rights are rendered as absolutely bare life, in the sense that they don't have even the right of the criminals, that they don't have any political rights. And there are several stories of their experience inside the detention center, like deterioration of their health condition, even cases where people have committed suicide, and the terrible experience of living in detention centers for years without having any contact with family. So and there is added gendered experience to it, like say how women suffer more because of that they have to take care of their children, even take them into the detention centers. There are cases where women who lost, got aborted because of the lack of proper treatment in the detention center. And there are cases where, women, once they're detained for years, husband remarrying, and when they come back out of the detention center, finding that husband is living with another woman and in a different family. So there are a lot of such terrible experience of the past detained life, which also talk about, the everyday crisis, the crisis at the family level that, people undergo. So likewise, to fight, I mean, once you are identified as illegal migrant, then to fight the case, it need a lot of financial backup. It need a lot of, understanding about how to approach lawyer and legally fight the case. So, but usually the migrants who are excluded from the list are largely coming from very poor background, who are not aware of how to fight the legal cases. And there are instances where people have actually committed suicide after the list published. Once they realize that they are not the list and they are now declared as illegal migrants, because of the anxiety, fear, and the sense of shame that they commit suicide. And there are several such cases of suicide in Assam after 2019. And also, as I indicated in the beginning, like CAA makes this distinction between Hindus and Muslims, and Hindus will be protected. But in fact, this is also not clear that although in theory, like CAA provides certain protection to the Hindu minority, but procedurally, it's not yet clear that whether even the Hindus who were promised to be given citizenship will be actually give a protection. Finally, I would like to conclude with this point that what does it mean for the political actors to have such kind of stringent policies in the international state? And I would like to argue that it's not actually, although they say that they detected 1.9 million people basically for deporting back to Bangladesh, there is no provision to deport even one individual to Bangladesh because there is no agreement between India and Bangladesh. But there is something which I have, I call as deportability. The power of deportation, the threat of deportation work very well for the elites and the political elites and the vested interest of the economically powerful group. Because, when you say that there is large scale illegal migration within the country, and if you can use it as a rhetoric in the electoral process, that will help the majoritarian party to gain more votes, and it helps in creating an atmosphere where attention would be always on the this religiously divided notion of illegal migration in Assam and elsewhere in the country. And also it helps the state, like once people live under the threat of deportation or detection, it also helps the powerful to actually utilize the labor for cheaper prices, right? You will see that now the people who are from Assam, especially from Bengali-speaking population, is moving to different parts of the country, living in the cities in very precarious condition, and they are actually working in the construction sites and other kind of labor field where they are available as cheap labor force. So there are both political and economic function for the deportation politics. So I think it's important to give attention to this aspect of what does these policies actually does to the powerful in the country. Finally, I would like to end up by mentioning this point that although a large chunk of population is now rendered as illegal migrant and there is this experience of bare life, we also need to talk about the politics of hope. There's a lot of protest and legal fight is going on in the country, basically to challenge these sort of discriminatory practices. And from the past experience, it is evident that people who were detained were able to prove their citizenship right by legally fighting, politically protesting. So there are active processes going on at the ground level by concerned legal activists and political activists to fight it legally. So I think my time is over, and I will stop here, and probably others will take over. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Salah. That was very good timekeeping, and thank you very much for your talk. We will now move on to the next speaker and take all questions at the end. So our next speaker is Debasrita Deb, who's presenting a paper titled Living Through Crisis, Unpacking the Lasting Scars of the Registry Test of Citizenship in Assam. Debasrita Deb is a PhD researcher at the Center for Regional Studies, University of Hyderabad. Her doctoral work focuses on the citizenship conundrum in Assam and its aftermath. She's particularly interested in topics related to citizenship, identity, statelessness, and migration. Devashrita, the floor is yours.
Okay, Bani, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible but not visible. Your
Yeah.
camera is not on. Yes.
Oh, yeah, I've joined to mobile internet because the Wi-Fi is gone, so I'm just keeping my video off.
Okay. All right. Mhm.
Okay. So the title of my paper is Living Through Crisis, Unpacking the Lasting Scars of the Registry Test of Citizenship in Assam. My previous presenter, Professor Salah, has already given a backdrop to the NRC, so I would just quickly move into the ethnographic insights that forms the backdrop of my paper. Through in this paper, I basically try to show how the material effects of crisis plays out in the lives of the people. So rather than looking at crisis, which is often constructed as political or logistical problems that needs to be solved, I seek to look at crisis in terms of human suffering. In other words, the crisis of citizenship, and more particularly the citizen in the Indian state of Assam who feel trapped or stuck by exploring their articulations of uncertainty in the context of the NRC. Now, when I'm speaking of crisis in the context of this paper, I mean that this crisis is seen in the form of a crisis of humanity and understood through the lens of loneliness. I mean, Earl Warren, who is a prominent jurist, he pointed out that citizenship is man's basic right, for it is nothing less than the right to have rights. Remove this priceless possession, and there remains a stateless person, disgraced and degraded in the eyes of his countrymen. Now, these words rightly sum up the fate of millions of residents in Assam whose names are excluded from the final list of NRC that was declared on August 31st, 2019, and all the others who are in detention camps in Assam declared as foreigners. Now, the citizen, it seems, is once again in crisis in Assam. The Indian government has decided that almost 2 million residents of the northeastern state of Assam may not be Indian citizens, and the state and the region and India itself is confronting a crisis of their own making. Now, the sheer arbitrariness of the NRC judgments and the resultant undue suffering brought upon those who are caught in the web of the exercise provides a timely reminder that as conscious citizens, we do not afford to be blasé about the man-made humanitarian tragedy playing out in slow motion. Pratik Hajela, who was in charge of overseeing the NRC updation process in Assam, uh, gave out a statement that the NRC touched the lives and souls of each and every individual. Indeed, it has, but not in a good way. Arbitrariness was exemplified in the randomness and unpredictability of the judgments. There have been several cases where children were excluded while their parents were included, and vice versa. Amongst those who were excluded were government employees, ex-servicemen, and also a former president's nephew. I am just stating out a field narrative of a person named Aisha Siddiqa Begum, who was the only person in her family who was excluded. Now, the reason? Because the R in her father Hamir's name was misspelled as D in her matriculation admit card. Now, this is just one of the multiple cases, and the more one delves deeper, the more bizarre it gets. Now, to be excluded from the NRC or to be recorded as a D voter carries grave implications in Assam. There is always the possibility of getting thrown into the detention centers. In the course of my data collection, I could document people, most of whom were illiterate and who had had to mortgage or sell off their lands, houses, and jewelry to hire lawyers to help them in the foreigners' tribunals tasked with deciding appeals. So all of this was because a primal fear gripped them. So on August 2018, when I had arrived in Silchar for collecting data for regarding the NRC thing, it had already been 8 months since Hanif Khan had hung himself up in a tree in his own backyard after his name was missing in the first NRC draft that was released on December 31st, 2017. I went to meet Ruksa Appa, Hanif's wife, to ask about the tragedy that had unfolded in their lives. Since 2017, Ruksa Appa has had to see many ups and downs in her life as a single woman. She had been evicted from two rented houses under some unwanted situation. At the time of my interview with her, she ran her family by working as a tailor, and her minor elder son was working as a migrant laborer. What struck me the most when I visited their dilapidated house for the interview was her unusually silent and introvert young son. I had the urge to ask Appa whether her 10 years old son was this quiet and introvert from earlier on, or it was his Abba's sudden death that made him like that. But I couldn't ask because I was afraid that hearing the answer, I wouldn't be able to hold back my tears. Now, from my interaction with Ruksa Appa, I came to know that Hanif was a man of about 37 years when the crisis had happened in their lives. He used to serve as a hired driver to a family, and when the NRC exercise began, the resultant apprehension of discrimination and the fear of losing citizenship that gripped the people of Assam also got to him. He was in constant fear of losing his citizenship. And moreover, around the same time in Assam, there were incessant reports in newspapers related to arrest and detention of persons belonging to the lower income strata by the police after the foreigners' tribunals had declared them foreigners. Now, all of these went on to create an environment of reign of terror and an eerie silence amongst the people. Hanif got more and more terrified that pushed him to take such an irreversible step to end his life. Hanif had submitted his NRC application in due time. The application appeared to be according to the prescribed rules. He established his citizenship with the prescribed documents beyond doubt. He claimed the inclusion of his and his family members' name in the NRC on the basis of the voters list of 1971. He was able to successfully show his linkage with his father, Mr. Raj Muhammad Khan, and also his mother, Mrs. Sahira Khan, through the voters list of 1971. He submitted his school certificates of the children to establish linkage with himself. So his wife Ruksa Appa told me that since the verification process of NRC began, he was in constant fear of a police torture in case he loses his citizenship. As the day of publication of the first draft of NRC neared, he often hid himself as if any police van passed through the highway near their house. 3 months before he passed away, he was still in his job and he went to a place named Udharban. There he found an army vehicle behind his vehicle and he started running instantly and came back home, crossing 50 kilometers of distance right on his foot. Learning this, his employer released him temporarily from his service. Since then, his wife narrated he stayed in his house and watched television for news and read newspapers and otherwise also tried to collect information about the NRC updation process. He would go on asking everyone about the rules and regulations and modalities of NRC and the consequences of non inclusion of his name. He was very, very concerned, but then that did not seem to have assured him, even when people told him that his names would be there in the list. His wife tried to take him to a doctor, but he did not agree. Uh, but on 31st December, Sunday, 2017, the day when the draft NRC was published and his name was missing, he went missing from his home since 7 p.m. His wife thought that he went to watch news on television, but when he did not come back after midnight, she started to search for him and was unable to find him throughout the night. She first saw the body around 6:50 a.m. next morning. She called the police officials to reach the spot around 8:30 a.m. and the body was sent to the nearest medical college for postmortem. He was no more. Ruxapa shared that her husband's self-worth was diminished with this illegalization. She told me that on finding his name missing, he said that he has no belief in himself anymore. He has no worth. He said that no one would treat him with respect and dignity. So Hanif's story reveals that an individual's picture of himself as a person of value begins to waver and grow dim as the status of citizenship, or what Marshall calls the basic acceptance of individual as a member of the society in which he or she lives, is lost. So through this story, we see how the crisis is lived through everyday lives of the people. The NRC has happened, but what unfolded in the lives of the people is something that shows that the crisis is ongoing. His family has had to live through the crisis of losing an integral part of his family. Furthermore, the stigma of being a Bangladeshi could also invite a mob's wrath in a moment. Somebody like Nirod Boron Das simply took away his own life. He was a retired school teacher. Uh, but he was the only one from his family who was excluded. He was taunted on the streets and he was called a Bangladeshi after his exclusion. He asked around, but nobody could explain why exactly he was excluded. And unable to bear this, he hanged himself. His wife told me that in his pocket that morning, instead of toffees, which he usually carried to offer to people on his morning walks, was the NRC rejection letter. So at least about 100 documented suicide cases have had happened since the NRC list was published, and all of these are suspected to be related to the NRC. Many accidents also took place when the people rushed to reach the foreigners' tribunals, which were held hundreds of kilometers away. They had been informed only hours in advance. The stories are heartbreaking. So what basically these stories of despair, these stories of anxiety reveals that the citizenship crisis has opened up a stage of suspension. It is a liminal stage, which is dangerous, which is unsettling, and which is a stage where norms disappear. So it's a kind of crisis, the manifestation of which can be seen in the form of numerous suicides, which are committed by people who are suffering from immense mental torture because of the fear of being marked as a foreigner, and also its consequences. Yeah, Bunny, I'll be finishing in some time. I mean, I would like to basically conclude by saying that it's not stated by the state or the Supreme Court what fate lies ahead for the people who would be excluded from the NRC or who are declared foreigners by the tribunals. What is ominous is that the state has ordered the construction of more and more detention centers. Now, there is no possibility of deporting this, as Professor Sala has already mentioned, since India does not have any treaty that to that effect with Bangladesh, from where it claims that the foreigners have come from. Now, it seems that such large number of persons, mostly innocent, will be incarcerated in prisons like detention camps, indefinitely depriving them of their most basic rights. The issues around citizenship like NRC and CAB are being exploited by those in power to polarize the society along religious lines for just electoral gains and political hegemony. But this comes at the cost of millions of innocent lives caught in the barbed wire of these divisive and hateful policies, and people who are having to live through this palpable crisis each and every day. The end to the citizenship register is nowhere to be seen, but then the lasting scars are seen on the lives of the people who are having to deal with the unending crisis of the NRC. So with this, I would like to put an end to my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debasrita, for that very interesting talk. Raises a lot of questions and also ties in very neatly with what Salapanathal was telling us earlier. So we'll keep the questions to the end, but let's welcome our last speaker for the day. She is Rita Priya Nandi, who's presenting a paper titled Documented Yet Fearful, A Crisis on the Loom at the India-Bangladesh Border. Rita Priya Nandi is currently pursuing a PhD at the Center for Regional Studies at the University of Hyderabad. She was formerly trained in political science and international relations at the Department of International Relations, Jadavpur University in Calcutta, where she pursued her graduation and post-graduation. Her research focuses on migration, citizenship, kinship, and surveillance as a part of everyday life in the India-Bangladesh borderland. Her research interests include borderlands, migration, citizenship, and identity. The floor is yours, Rita Priya.
Thank you, Bani. Am I audible? Right. So my presentation is titled Documented Yet Fearful, A Crisis on the Loom at the India-Bangladesh Border, which presents a slightly different picture than what my previous speakers have told so far. So the National Register of Citizenship has engendered profound discourse and conjecture within India's social and political milieu, especially in the context of Assam, as Dr. Salah and Debashita have already elucidated. It stands as a contentious issue ever since there has been a gross exclusion of 1.9 million people from the NRC list in Assam. Initially conceived to identify illegal immigrants predominantly from Bangladesh and to create a definitive registry of Indian citizens within Assam, the execution and implications of the NRC process have ignited extensive debate, prompting significant concerns regarding human rights, citizenship, and the potential exclusion of marginalized demographics. The onus placed on individuals to prove their citizenship within a stipulated time frame has presented a considerable hurdle for those with limited access to documentation. The implementation of NRC in West Bengal has, however, been a subject of extensive deliberation and speculation in India's political and social landscape. The potential extension of NRC to West Bengal has been a contentious issue, rife with political interests. The politicization of NRC in West Bengal has been palpable, with various political parties using the issue as a platform for their distinct agendas. The discourse intersects with wider political narratives, often leading to increased polarization and communal tensions within the state. However, the implementation of NRC in West Bengal has not been concretized by the state government yet. The subject has remained under discussion and evaluation, but no official decision has been made so far. However, the state government has directed two detention centers to be constructed, one in Kolkata and one in North 24 Parganas, uh, which offer their dubious stand on what they want to do about the implementation of NRC in West Bengal. It is in this context that I would like to make my presentation today. So I'm looking at the border villages of Malda along the India-Bangladesh borderland, and to note that the 4096 kilometer long India-Bangladesh border, out of which more than half of the length is shared by West Bengal, is mostly unfenced, but heavily surveilled, so to say. So when the border making process was in progress, it served as a bureaucratic and administrative tool for the sovereign states of both India and Bangladesh to mark their territories. However, there was no structure until a very long time to denote its existence to the people living on the borderland. Thus, as many scholars like Shendel, Jason Kons, Shana Ghosh, and others note, the defiance of the border was very natural. Mobility across the border prevailed long before the border came into existence, and the openness of the border facilitated many cross-border exchanges, including cross-border marriages. These cross-border exchanges still persist, but the gradual rigidification of the border infrastructure has hindered cross-border mobility and rendered belonging, family relations, and kinship ties fraught and distraught over time. In times of restrictive citizenship policies and exercises like the CAA and the NRC that have already had a ripple effect in Assam, people at the India-Bangladesh border live with a constant fear of implementation of such an exclusionary citizenship exercise. The in times when these states are pushing for stricter border controls and surveillance, the fear of exclusion leads the residents of the borders to jump on the bandwagon of arranging identity and membership papers according to legacy data and navigate their way around the tricky bureaucratic puzzle of becoming viable in the eyes of the state. This fear trickles down to their everyday life at the border. So I would like to narrate the story of Rokia Bibi, whom I interviewed. She's a Bengali-speaking Muslim woman from Bangladesh who married into India before the border fence came up. And unlike previous times when she could make undocumented clandestine journeys back to her natal home in Bangladesh, at the moment it is very difficult to travel to her natal home without proper documents that need to be shown at the BSF outpost. Just to flag, when I refer to these women as women from Bangladesh or Bangladeshi women, I do not intend to vilify them because of their identity. Contrary to how the state often uses the figure of an illegal Bangladeshi to criminalize them, I focus on bringing out the complexities that underlie their life at the borders. I was married off at a time when the border fence did not come up between India and Bangladesh. My husband and I got married one afternoon in Rajshahi, and we walked back to my in-laws' place in Malda, right through where the border fence exists now. I left behind my natal home and family members to begin a new phase of my life on this side of the border. And after the border fence came up, it has been difficult to maintain regular ties with my people back home, as I hardly get to see them or participate in family events, as we require a passport and a visa to travel to Bangladesh. Earlier, one could go to the other side without a passport so effortlessly, and I have made several such visits to my natal home, even with the BSF guards on duty. One is only left with the option of seeing their brothers and sisters on infrequent video calls. It has been 30 years since I have lived here, but I could hardly cut off ties with the place where I grew up and belong to. It is interesting to trace how such undocumented journeys eventually ended up in documented journeys for many of these women. Most of these women now possess a passport. However, it involves a lot of time and money to acquire a passport and a visa and then travel back to Bangladesh. Most importantly, the process of making a passport is tedious and often involves middlemen charging money from them much higher than what is expected, as reported by many. However, long before the passport became mandatory for traveling to the other side, Rokia Bibi and her lights have made several visits to their families, and not all such visits went unnoticed by the BSF. But there have been instances where the BSF also turned a blind eye. And as Rokia Bibi spoke to me, do you think we used to go under their nose? No. Maybe they would see us from afar, but they would not say anything to us. They knew somehow that we were visiting our mothers and fathers and our families. Sometimes we would give them our voter cards and they would ask us for our time of return. And upon coming back to this side of the border, our documents would be returned. Her words resonate with an unwritten kinship that once existed between the border guards and the cross-border travelers. However, there is a neat distinction between other border crossers and people like Rokia Bibi, and this differential treatment is made out of a feeling of sympathy for these women who visit their family, and this results in a relationship of conviviality of the border guards who are agents of the state, to so to say. The scenario has changed now as border control has been made stringent and passports are mandatory. Uh, so to acquire a passport, one needs to produce a set of other documents like proof of residence and proof of place of birth. For people like Rokia Bibi, acquiring relevant documents like ration cards, voter cards, PAN cards, or other cards after marriage involved a slightly different process. As told to me, no one actually verified all of this, and it would be enough if a certificate was attested by the local high school headmaster, and one did not really require a voter card to cast their votes back then. Someone could just testify that this woman was their daughter, and that would do the task. Uh, in this context, scholars like Kamal Sadiq, who argue that illegal immigrants, after crossing the border, become indistinguishable from citizens, and documentary citizenship allows these people international movement and voting rights, which threatens national sovereignty as a result of it. It is not the case because in the current context where there may be an NRC-like exercise that is being apprehended by many living on the borders, we can see that there is a surge of documents. There is no dearth of documents, so to say. There is a surge of documents. The same has been noted by scholars like Shahana Ghosh. And the surge of documents is particularly in the context of the fear that allows them to rearrange their documents at the moment so that they are not left out. They are not uh, penalized by the state in the current context if a situation like NRC is to happen in Bengal. I spoke to a lawyer who made it clearer why such strategies become the last resort, specifically for the borderland population. To quote him, people are generally unaware of the law. Here, almost everyone has some kinship ties with Bangladesh even today. However, there is a prevailing fear due to the apprehension of NRC. This region was one when it was undivided. There used to be closer ties with people from across the border where then there was no border, in fact. The political parties have also capitalized on this fear of NRC and have tried to instill a sense of threat among the people. If NRC is ever implemented, many people will be jeopardized in this region. However, people are trying to make amends to their legacy data, correcting major paperwork to escape this predicament. For example, if any woman married from Bangladesh into India, they would try to find someone with the same name as their biological father on this side and align her documents in line with his. Moreover, this was usually kept to oneself If someone's documents are not aligned, they would be in big trouble now. There were so many cases that I would deal with where people asked me to arrange their papers. There would be no time to breathe while indulging in this task. I would do it often because these people needed it. Proving legacy is so difficult, as often the papers get ruined or the address gets altered. There will be added difficulty if there are typographical errors. So it's clear how a deep rooted sense of fear one goes through, and in fear of the dire consequences of being unable to prove one's legacy if a policy like NRC is ever implemented in Bengal. Uh, I would like to contextualize Apostolos Andrikopoulos' idea of undocumented unauthorized identity craft, where he argues about West African migrants in Netherlands who establish connections and relations in order to gather and gain citizenship documents and become viable in the eyes of the state. The same can be seen in the context of the India-Bangladesh border, where these are unauthorized and not illegal per se, because if they were ever to come under the scanner of the state, they would be termed as illegal. But when we see how the paper making process works here, we can see how even networks of the state are involved in making. Thank you, Bani, for the reminder. How the agents of the state are also equally involved in assisting these people. So it is not simply about having citizenship, but also about having to prove their legacy. Like in the context of Assam, it has been seen how numerous people had to face jeopardy due to certain discrepancies in their legacy data, and that has led them to lead their lives or a part of their life in detention camps after being detected, even though they have inhabited the region for years. What followed was a condition of deportability, as Dr. Salah noted, where people lived with a constant fear of getting deported despite no legal provision for deportation existing between India and Bangladesh. Uh, so the if NRC is ever living is ever implemented in Bengal, the worst affected population would be those living in the borderlands, as the state leaves no scope to incriminate and illegalize these people at the margins. Therefore, such survival strategies around navigating paperwork becoming a possibility for many of these residents, and especially the Bangladeshi women who married into India and have been living on this side of the border for many years now. I would like to conclude by stating some of the fears that they expressed as a part of our interactions. I would often hear pleas to me when I was interacting with them. They would ask me if I would sort of expose their details to the police, or if I was associated with the NRC process, I was termed as an NRC agent. So this fear was so ingrained in them. And lastly, the familial part of it cannot also be seen in isolation, where where their husbands also would indulge in taking a jibe at them. And I happened to interact with one such family where the Indian husband uh, explicitly said, let an RC happen. What is it to me? I have all the documents in congruence. If need be, I will take her to Bangladesh. If they are to catch someone, it is her right. So such is the reality of being for such borderland population in along the India Bangladesh border, where the changing border control and border infrastructure is only accentuating the fear and helplessness of these borderland residents. Thank you, Bani.
Thank you very much, Rita Priya, and thank you to all the speakers. I think these have been very rich and grounded explorations, and you really tried to, or really painted a very vivid picture of the crisis as it is unfolding in the India-Bangladesh borderlands. And through each of your papers, there are several strands, of course, empirically, but also conceptually, that kind of tie these different papers together. So the floor is now open to questions. The audience is free to either write in their questions or to raise their hand. And to begin with, we have a question right away by Susanna Gumigu. So Susanna, please ask your question.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So. Okay. Thank you. So you can now you can hear me and see me.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for these 3 interventions, which give us a good understanding of what is going on. And well, maybe I present myself. So I'm working in the Department of French Literature. I'm mainly working on Francophone literatures in Africa. I'm also the director of the International Center of Global South Studies, but I'm not a specialist for India. So my question is a more general one, and sorry, and my English is not my preferred language, so I try to get to say what I like to say, but I've spoken French all morning. So my question is about the use you make of the concept of crisis, because I've seen in the first intervention you were speaking of everyday crisis. In the second, it was crisis of humanity. And I think crisis is humanity is not the same thing as humanitarian crisis, because humanitarian crisis, that's what we are having in Gaza or something like that. So I wanted to ask you about what you mean by crisis of humanity. And I was thinking about, and we had that yesterday in the keynote, about the essay of Janet Reutemann and Ashim Bembe, regimes of subjectivity in times of crisis, because they are also speaking of such an everyday crisis. Their starting point is that in Cameroon in the 19th, people said, we have the crisis. This was due to, it was, on the one hand, it was lots of political issues, economic issues due to the structural adjustment programs. But in the way they define it, it was also to a large extent an epistemological crisis. People had to figure out how to make sense of what they are living. So this is the one part of the question. Can one link your notions of crisis to this understanding? But my impression was that for much of the population you are talking of, crisis goes much further, because it's really an existential threat. When you go out and you have no documents and you risk to be picked up by police control, and you can't move as you want. And we are actually planning a research project which is called Figurations of the Precarious. And our notion of the precarious is not that much precarity in the sense of labor relations, but exposure to contingency, asymmetry of power, and the deleterious effects people fear under these conditions. So the way people experience their lives. So my question would be, do you think this notion would be useful in describing what you're describing?
Thank you very much, Susanna. Salah, would you like to answer first?
Yes, perhaps I will try to answer some part of it, and then probably the Vashida can respond to it. So thank you, Professor Susanna, for very thought-provoking comments, and really helpful for us to think about, and relate it to the sort of questions that we are raising from our context to the larger, global scenario. So maybe I'll start with your last point about the idea of precarity and how do we make sense of it. So in fact, in one of my essays, I have used the term precarious citizenship. So sort of, to understand the nature of the crisis here, it's, like, what does it mean to be a citizen or a citizen in a situation where your, rights are, curtailed in a particular situation, or what happens to people who are living under the looming threat of, detected as illegal migrants. So, unlike the scenario probably in your context or in the Western context, you will see that in India, especially in Assam state, and of course, as Rita Priya explained in even West Bengal borderlands, you will see that, people live with a notion of citizenship which is not very consistent, right? People have evolving status of citizenship, in the sense that, and something which we have not explained in our presentation, is that some of the people who have been identified now as illegal migrants were earlier identified as partial citizens. Like, say, there is this category called D voters, doubtful voters, because if you look at 1990s and 2000 policies of the state, you will see that state came up with some kind of a policy which identify a large section of population not as illegal migrant but as doubtful voters. They are doubted as citizens or not, and kept in a very ambiguous liminal space. And then, many of them were once bracketed in that, then they live with the precarity of, that liminal space. And so those who lived as citizens then transformed as partial citizens or doubtful citizens, and then or dubious citizens, and then, illegalized over a period of time. So which points to the fact that, people who lives with, this status undergo certain kind of precarity, and, precarity of being precarity of, detained by the state, detected by the state, detained by the state, and also, experiencing other sorts of violence, right? Because there are other kinds of actors, say, for example, dominant community who have, who think that they are the natural citizens of the state, and who, which is like Assamese, Hindu population, would produce different sorts of violence upon different sorts of violence, symbolic and physical violence at times upon communities which are identified as, partial citizens, or, doubted as illegal migrants. So the precarity of violence, the precarity of, economic precarity, like, finding appropriate economic position in the society. They are precarious in terms of the spaces where they live. They are ghettoized. They live in vulnerable, spaces like, say, riverine islands, and places where they can't be really detected by the larger population or the state, and so on. So there are different sorts of precarity they experience, and their citizenship is actually a precarious citizenship. So because of the ambiguous status that, and their vulnerability to violence, poverty, health crisis, and so on. And this has been, I think, explored even in the Western scenario, like how certain population experience the status of precarious citizenship. So it makes sense in our context. Secondly, I do agree with the point of epistemological crisis. Like, people are not able to understand what goes on. So it is one thing to say that there are state actions and legal interventions of the state. But what is it that they're experiencing at the ground level? Like, there is an absolute confusion among the population about the kind of processes that are involved. Because people, even if when state agencies conduct the survey and identify, through certain process of verification, it's not quite clear to the ordinary people that these processes would eventually lead to the exclusion of the population, right? I mean, there is no clarity, or there is no knowledge or awareness about the what it will be in future. So a lot of people were not really aware, or not really thoughtful about the kind of consequences it would bring. And this is also quite evident in the past experience, how people ended up in detention centers when they were not having any sense of being detected by the state. So there is, I think, in that sense, an epistemological crisis, a kind of lack of knowledge about their own conditions, and inability to comprehend the kind of politics that goes on. And finally, to briefly, I think Devashira would talk about it. I mean, I have used humanitarian crisis in the context of not the crisis of humanity, but humanitarian crisis in terms of how when a large number of population is excluded from the citizenship, right, and rendered as illegal migrants, their political rights are, taken away, and it created a kind of humanitarian crisis. But I was also talking about the paradox of the humanitarian crisis, or no, I was talking about the paradox of humanitarianism in India, that this whole intervention by the state is in the name of humanitarianism, in the sense that humanitarian consideration of giving protection to certain populations who are coming from neighboring countries. So, but at the same time, it clearly excludes, and the idea is exclusion, then inclusion. So the paradox and the contradiction lies in the language of the state is something which I wanted to kind of flag at the beginning of the presentation. So I hope I have addressed some of the concerns. I'm not sure. Thank you.
Devasrita, would you like to answer that, or should we?
Yes. Okay, so thank you for your question, ma'am. So when I'm using the concept of crisis, I'm basically using it to kind of refer to a time of intense difficulty or danger. This is what I have tried to show through my paper. So when I use the concept of crisis, I use it to show what are the material effects of crisis. When I'm saying that crisis is a time of intense difficulty or danger, what are the material effects on the crisis in the lives of the people who are having to go through it. And initially, when I began my presentation, I had mentioned that I am not looking at crisis which is constructed as political or logistical problems to be solved, but rather I want to see how crisis is lived through human suffering. Rather, in the sense, what is the crisis of citizenship in Assam, and or in particular, what is the crisis of citizen in Assam? And through my ethnographic insights, I have tried to show how the citizenship register and how the exclusion from the citizenship register, which has deprived people of their basic rights, have pushed them to such a brink that people have had to commit suicides. People have had to go through, bouts of intense anxiety, intense pain, intense suffering. People have lost all of their belongings in the pressure or in the process of proving their citizenship. So this is how they are living through the crisis. This is how they're living through the difficult times that the citizenship register has kind of unfolded in their lives. And it is actually a crisis of humanity, because all of these are basically outcomes of policies which have been undertaken by the state. It is a state exacerbated process. It's not something natural. It is a man-made crisis. It's a crisis of humanity, because state policies have inflicted this crisis on the lives of the people which it has affected. So it is along these lines that I have tried to use the concept of crisis, especially in the context of my paper.
Thank you. If you don't have more hands raised right now, no, that I can see. So I have some questions as well, and just actually kind of building upon what Susanna's questions were. And I have questions for all three of you. For Salah, and Sebastian also has questions. So maybe I ask and then we have Sebastian come on. Salah, so I was wondering with your question of, you spoke about you've used the term precarity in a previous work of yours, and you also use the concept of bare life. And within this entire kind of question of precarity, the idea of bare life has been critiqued quite a bit. And then in your presentation, you also kind of invoke the politics of hope, right? And within these two extremes of like politics of hope and bare life, is there something else that was kind of forthcoming in your presentation or in the ethnographic work that you've done? And so, for instance, this idea of suicides has a number of you have spoken about this thing, and whether I'm thinking about whether suicide is also can be termed as political life, right? And it's a reclamation of some kind of politics there, and whether that is only to be framed in terms of a humanitarian crisis, or there is some kind of stronger political critique to be made over there, and how you might kind of think about that. To Debashree, I was kind of wondering, it's very helpful to kind of understand the ways in which you use the term crisis, and you say it in terms of difficulty and danger. But perhaps I think you're talking about everyday crisis, and perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about how you see these different scales of crisis emerging and sort of a temporality of crisis. There's an individual crisis, sort of, or a crisis at the level of the family, crisis at the level of the neighborhood, clearly, crisis at the level of the state of Assam, and then the so-called nation-state construct of India. So there are multiple crises over there, right? How are they kind of feeding into each other, and whether you can really pull apart these different scalar dimensions. And what also comes across in your paper is a temporal dimension. And you also make the claim that this crisis is kind of not just ongoing, but it is also future-oriented. So could you tell us something a little more about the temporality of this crisis that you're trying to articulate? And lastly, for Ritapriya, I was wondering, this is really, really interesting work. And I was really kind of thinking about how you position yourself in the field and how you present yourself to your interlocutors, and what are the kinds of dilemmas or not, or negotiations that you undergo as a researcher, particularly when you're engaging with people telling you about the stories of border crossing, this idea of being Bangladeshi or not. So how do you kind of navigate these regimes of representation, so to speak, when you're conducting your field work? And this is out of empirical curiosity as well, that what changes have been inferred, if any, through the digitization of the state, right? So beyond just the paper documents and then the collection of paper documents and the dearth and the surge of documents, there's also a surge of digitization, Aadhaar card and so on. And what kind of new contradictions does this kind of digitization bring, if at all, and if that's come up in your fieldwork? Any of you can start. Salah, perhaps you. Yeah.
Okay, let me start. Thank you, Bani, for bringing those interesting questions. And this actually reminds me of the kind of discussion that we had in Tübingen after the presentation about the question of bare lives. And, so let me, to clarify it, like, I have used the term bare lives in the title of the presentation. Perhaps I have not used extensively in the presentation, or not used enough. So to make sense of the context, right, we know that Agamben's idea of bare life has been extensively used. How, when we talk about how individuals are stripped of their, basic citizenship rights and rendered into mere biological existence without having any political right. So, and a critique of Agamben, as we see in many of the recent work, is also that, there is some kind of a static notion of bare life implied in Agamben's framework, like, seeing, certain population as endlessly, carrying this bare life because nation states do not want to include these categories and so on. So the experience of violence, suspension of the political rights becomes the norm, right? But then so the critique is that there is also possibility of dynamism and change, and this is quite evident in some of the works, like so Didier Fassin's works on humanitarian politics in French. He talk about how people, even from a condition of bare life, actually reclaim a political life by utilizing certain kind of potential offered by the state itself, like showing the for example, extreme precarity of some section within the population, like say women who are experiencing sexual violence would or certain kind of extreme sort of medical disadvantage would seek for certain kind of humanitarian aid and then gain certain kind of specific status within the nation state. We don't see such sort of humanitarian consideration in our context. There is absolutely no law which would protect the one who has extreme sort of suffering. But what I could see from my own interventions in the my own kind of field insight is that even people who have been detained in the past, and as I said, detention is not a new thing. People have been detained in the past as well. They were rendered as bare life, right? They were taken from their citizenship status and then coercively kept in detention centers, in fact, in jails in Assam. But many of them were able to come out of it, got back to their normal, ordinary life after legally fighting. So, because they were able to prove their citizenship after a long legal battle, and then came out as legal citizens. So there is this movement from citizenship status to bare life and then reclaiming the political life, right? Or some of them were able to fight with not proving the citizenship, but then were able to successfully fight and show that and Supreme Court came up with a judgment in 2019 that no individual can be detained in a detention center, even if they are declared as illegal migrant, beyond 3 years, unless you are able to deport them back to the country of origin. And there is no provision to deport to Bangladesh. So those who have lived in detention center after 3 years, and in fact, many have lived for 10 years and so on, and Supreme Court severely criticized this action of the state and then asked them to release. So some of them have actually come out of the detention center and then came back to their family and now leading an ordinary life. Of course, they can't reclaim the life that they had in the past because the detained life, thoroughly shake their, social world, and they cannot recover from that, from the loss of their life. But they do have freedom to move, freedom of mobility. They who do have certain kind of rights. So in this and there is ongoing political protest, and even the Supreme Court judgment in 2019 was actually a consequence of a human rights intervention who legally fought. So what we are talking about the politics of hope here, like how even in an extreme situation of suffering and extreme crisis situation, there is also politics of hope. There are ways in which people would move from an extremely precarious situation to potentially hopeful situation. So in that sense, I think bare life, we need to see the dynamism from bare life to something else if we empirically look at the context here. And regarding and you were talking about the suicide and death cases and whether this can be also seen as a politics of, I would like to read this as a kind of consequence of the necropolitics, in the sense that, how state policies, not directly killing the subjects, but, leading to certain sort of death, slow death of the people, or forcing people to commit suicide because of the kind of, extreme trauma that it creates among the people. So this actually reminds me of a work which is conducted in the US-Mexican border, where now I'm forgetting the name of the scholar who come up with this thing that how the state policies, which appears as purely bureaucratic in nature, instruct people to behave in certain fashion, would eventually lead to the death of the people without actually being killed by the state through any physical ways. For example, with a stringent policy which regulate the US-Mexican border would prompt the people to cross the border through, deserted, extremely difficult terrain of, geography where policing is not there. But then people who cross such, route ultimately would not reach the place because of the hardship and the difficulties, like they have to encounter other, they have to go through forest, they have to encounter other kinds of, geographical hazards, and people would die. So this scholar have actually discovered the bonds of the death and combining archaeological research and anthropological inquiry and claiming that the violence implied in the policies, the necropolitics of the policies of the US state. So in a similar fashion, one can say that how the state policies actually force the people to kill themselves. It's not that they actually kill directly through using a physical force, but it actually forces people to kill. And to give a different example, when the NRC list was published, those who were left out were asked to produce if they want to appeal, they can appeal within a couple of days, and they can produce the proper documents, and then they would possibly get the claim of citizenship. So just giving a couple of days created a lot of anxiety, and there was a haphazard situation, and they had to they have to travel very far, for example, like 3-4 hours of journey from their village to reach the district headquarters wherever they have to submit their document. And in fact, this has happened there was massive travel from the, say, local trucks and vans were running through the highways to reach the place to provide the document on time. This has led to, and during these 2 days, there were a series of incidents of accidents and death of people. So what does it mean? It means that how the state policy and certain kind of which force people to move in certain ways in a quick span of time, and people have died because of the kind of crisis that is created by the state in a particular situation. These are examples of how the policies would lead to death in certain ways, which are not do not appear like a direct killing, but kind of killing in indirect ways. So I mean, when you were asking about the suicide, I thought we have to read it as like kind of a consequence of the necropolitics, and this is how I would like to kind of perceive such phenomenon. Yeah, I think I will stop here, and then
Thank you, Sala. Devasrita and Rita Priya, if you could, we are running out of time, so if you could keep your answers succinct, and then because Sebastian Thies also has a question, and after that we'd end. So yes, please.
Okay, so Bani, your question was about the scalar dimension of crisis and how there is an everydayness of crisis. So I would basically, I mean, probably I did not explain it much in the presentation. So yes, you were right that the crisis is not just at the broader micro level, at the broader macro level, but even in the micro level, this crisis has penetrated. So it's not just, I mean, so an individual faces crisis in terms of losing his or her citizenship through the state-directed policies. That is one thing. But at the individual level, also the stigma of being a Bangladeshi or the stigma of being excluded has also led to the penetration of the crisis at the macro level. So through when I was on a data collection thing in Assam, I have seen how the exclusion of names from the NRC also led to a kind of exclusion from also led to a kind of social exclusion, social boycott of the people whose names were not there in the NRC. So at an individual level, also the crisis had penetrated. At a familiar level, I think Hanif Khan's death story, the ethnographic insight into Hanif Khan's life, basically tells us how at a familiar life, the familiar life is ruptured through the NRC, because losing a family member to a citizenship crisis not only disrupts the normal functioning of a family, but it also, kind of emerges as an experience of a compression where the life has been disrupted. So we can see how the crisis has excurbrated into the familial life. At an individual level, the very stigma or the very fear of being called a Bangladeshi or being socially boycotted has pushed people to such a brink that they are being forced to take such huge decisions or such huge steps of ending their lives, which is not something that the world has experienced henceforth. Other than that, I think at an everyday level, I mean, through my fieldwork, I've seen how people have been removed from their places of work after their names were being excluded on the pretext that they will be detained by the police. I have seen how marriages were broken just because a person's name did not figure in the NRC list. So these are some of the scalar dynamics. It's not just to mean that the crisis is experienced only at a familial level, but at an individual and a very personal level, this crisis is felt. The crisis is stopping people from starting their families. Existing families are being broken. People are being thrown out of their employment from the places of war. So at this level, the crisis is working out or interplaying out in different directions. So this is how I believe the scalar dimension of the crisis can be more and more